Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining into the second of our Meet the Locals national sessions for 2019. Hopefully everyone can hear me already. If not, shout out in the comments. To get things started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today, the Jagera, Yagara, and Turrbal people. I'd like to pay my respect to elders, past, present, and to our future leaders as well. I'd also like to acknowledge, pay respect to the tens of thousands of years of First Nations living, thriving, and creating in the continent of Australia, and acknowledge that we're currently on land that was never ceded. My name's Andrew Tuttle. I'm the Manager of National Engagement at APRA AMCOS. I'm really looking forward to this second of our Meet the Locals sessions. The first session, so I'll take the screen share off. The first session was last week. That was presented by Nikki from our Writer Services team, and also the Suzanne from Arts Law. It's definitely a worthwhile session for anyone who's interested in watching. We'll be putting that on our YouTube as well as the session tonight as well. So this session will be in two parts. We're starting with a couple of presentations from the Australian Council for the Arts, from Kirsty Rivers and from Dane Hunnerup. So they'll be talking broadly about what the Australian Council do as an organisation, and also a bit more about music grants in general. After that, we'll also be getting Kip Wood from our APRA AMCOS Media Licensing Department to give a bit of an update on and background on all things logistics related to digital music. So there's a lot to discover. A bit of housekeeping. If you do have questions, if it's possible to message me directly with them, that'd be great, and I'll compile them. Otherwise, if not, still just pop them in the chat to all panelists or everyone, and I'll compile the answers for the various sessions. So thanks for your time. I'll quickly hand over in a moment to Dane from Australia Council. Before I do that, I'm also just wanting to give a bit of a reminder and heads up about some other APRA AMCOS happenings as well. So for those of you in different states and territories around Australia, I think it'd be really great if you're interested in joining into the various state-based Meet the Locals sessions that are happening throughout March. It's a bit of an opportunity to speed date with various members of the music community in your state. And also you can, as well as that, it's definitely another thing that's worthwhile checking out on our YouTube is the, sorry about that. It's the one thing to just thing is about the so the Songwriter Speak sessions we've been doing as well. So we've been doing various sessions on our different APRA members talking about their craft, and it's been really great to have. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Dane from Kirsty from the Australian Council, and hand over to you now. Thanks, Kirsty.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Andrew. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to start my video. I'm not very good at Zoom, even after all these months and months of living in lockdown. Andrew, and all team at APRA, so kind of you to invite us here tonight. We really appreciate it. I'm actually calling in from the lands of the Kulin Nation, specifically the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people, from Yallabarang, which is now known as Collingwood. So I also would like to pay my respects to all elders, past, present and emerging, and like to acknowledge any First Nations members in this meeting and thank them deeply for their custodianship of their various countries and their commitment to their culture, which we all benefit from. Thank you. So my name is Kirsty Rivers, and I'm the head of music at the Australia Council. There's two people from the Australia Council here tonight. There's Dane Hunnerup, who works in our Artist Services team, and there's me. And I am coming in just to give you a bit of an oversight on the Australia Council. Very, very quick overview of what we do, because I think the Australia Council is such an important organisation, but often is not really present in the music sector as much as we'd like it to be, but can play and does play such an important role behind the scenes. I'm actually new to the Australia Council. I actually have I've been here for a year. I say new, but I only say new in the context of COVID-19 and living through lockdown in Victoria. So while the Australia Council is based in New South Wales, it operates nationally, and I'm actually based in Victoria. One of the other things I'd also like to note is that I'll be sharing my email address with you, or Andrew will, so feel free to contact me at any time, and also have a look at our website, not only for funding and investment, but also for some of the other things that I'll tell you about later that we do. Now, I actually am very familiar with APRA AMCOS, I should say, because I actually worked for APRA for 17 years, a long time ago. And some people who may be here tonight may remember me. I was the national manager for APRA AMCOS until 6 years ago. And 6 years ago, I went to work for Creative Victoria to run a program called Music Works. So I have a very long history in working with songwriters, composers, but also working to try and find opportunities to bring people together, share culture, share information, and make music really impact when we talk about arts and the importance of arts for social, creative and economic reasons. And one of the reasons I actually came to the Australia Council is because I really truly believe that they can, one of the few organisations that can truly make all of these things come together. So I'm very much interested in developing partnerships and opportunities for everyone. And one of the ways we'll talk about it later is through our arts investment. I'm not the expert in arts and investment, that's actually Dane. So Dane will be carrying on a bit later with a bit more information about that. So the Australia Council itself is, and a lot of people don't quite realise it, is a federal government agency. So although we're not the federal government itself, we're an agency that works on behalf of the federal government to deliver support into the arts and creative industries, but also to share the stories and advocate for the benefits of working with arts and culture and creativity generally. So we work in a lot of different ways. One of the most important documents we have is our corporate plan. Of course, how exciting to talk about a corporate plan, but nevertheless, it does explain that the theme of our corporate plan is creativity connects us. And that's one of the most important, I guess, stories I want to tell, is that the Australia Council is here for everybody. It has to reflect our diverse communities. It has to work and support change and opportunity, but also can be the biggest megaphone for the wonder of Australian culture and Australian opportunities around the world. And we're very proud of the flagship role that we actually play there as well. The organisation physically is based in New South Wales. As I said, I'm in Victoria, and we have a few staff working around various parts of the country. But we, of course, like everybody else, we don't work physically anymore. We actually live in a hybrid world, and that's why we're able to work from many places, but it also means that we can advocate and tell stories from the various places that we work from with a lot of intimate knowledge as well. One of the things I think is really important to tell a story when we tell the story about the Australia Council too is that we have a large Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander unit within the Australia Council. In fact, we have representation at board level, executive level, and throughout the organisation working independently to determine the opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And I really encourage anyone who is a First Nations artist or industry worker to talk not only with Dane or myself, but also to explore opportunities to talk with our First Nations team. In my case, my peer would be led by Trish Adej, but we can also work with multiple people within our arts and artist services teams. So the Australia Council works across many arms. One of the things that I wanted to come in here today is to remind you about our research, because your research can really help when you're trying to build business cases to get grants and things like that. The opportunities and the depth of the research the Australia Council has can sometimes just give you those little extra words and ideas that can really push your business case forward where it matches. So, and I mean, the other thing that people are not always aware of is that we actually fund in multi-year commitments to not just orchestras and operas and organisations like that, but we also fund organisations like Sounds Australia. We also fund, I'm based in Melbourne. I spent today at the Melbourne Electronic Sound Studio. So there's lots of different organisations around the country that actually have direct investment from the Australia Council, which we do over multiple years to ensure their stability and impact for you. In the past, we've also worked with most of the AMON group, so that could be Q Music or Music NT or Music Victoria, depending on where you're based. But we've worked with them over many, many years to try and build up the music communities as well. And it's all music communities. We're not identifying you by genre or by physical place. It's all the people who make music and build our cultural story. So the reason I want to talk about the research is because one of the ones that we're doing now, which is really, I find interesting anyway, is our National Arts Participation Survey. So if that pops up ever in your travels, please fill in these surveys because it really does help add to the story. And I think music doesn't always get across the line, usually because it's bombarded with requests for more information. But we just did a survey, which is actually an ongoing survey, which is, I think, the last 7 years, but maybe don't quote me on that, that has been able to really help the various peak organisations in music, and including the Australia Council, when they talk to the federal government about the value of music. And I've just got some figures up in front of me. This recent research we did, which tells us that in 2019, and I obviously acknowledge that this is pre-COVID, we do have some further figures on that, but I won't bring those to the table just yet. 9.9 million Australians attended live music events or festivals, which is 48% of the population over 15 years, which had been growing, and I anticipate it will grow when we come back to a more normal situation. But 2 in 3 Australians listen to music on radio or television, and 1 in 3 Australians stream music through a paid subscription. And all of this sort of information, the actual real data, is the sort of stuff that the Australia Council can collect, but then gets used behind the scenes when we advocate to the value of those, of not just music, but the entire arts and culture industries generally. What are we working on at the moment with APRA? We're also looking, APRA's been really, really powerful in its interests around building a story for composers and songwriters that says that the value of being able to tell an Australian story is such that we should be really looking towards things like being a net exporter. So when organisations like APRA come to the Australia Council, we listen and we're trying to incorporate the things that we can into our advocacy when they make sense and they align with what everyone's trying to do. We've also spent a lot of time working with our response to COVID-19, not only for the live music sector with organisations like APRA and AMCOS and PPCA and ARIA and all those sort of people, but also in real terms with trying to make grants as quickly and efficiently available to anyone who applies. So we were very pleased to be able to offer literally hundreds and hundreds of grants last year to the Australian community. And I just started at the Australia Council, but I just really wanted to provide complete kudos to the organisation itself that churned out thousands of grants with no time at all, and hopefully I know a lot of music people benefited from that. So I think the other thing that the Australia Council does is, and that you can be part of, is just visibility for the role of music. And some of that visibility is just about ensuring that we work together as much as possible to tell that story about why music's important. The only other element that I'd like to talk about the Australia Council that I've really noticed in the time that I've been there is that the music isn't super present in some of the opportunities in professional development. And there's some really fantastic leadership programs and professional development programs that might suit you depending on where you are in your career. But some of those programs that the Australia Council runs don't have a high music at the moment, don't have a high music uptake. And I really want to make sure that music thinks that they could be part of those programs. Again, explore them on our website. which is australiacouncil.gov.au, but also have a think about if you could be that person too. It's not exclusive by any means to art music or orchestrated music. It is open to all music from all backgrounds and all areas of Australia. And that there's a matter of opportunity. I'll just talk about our fellowship. Each year we have a fellowship in each arts sector. And last year's fellow was Anna Laverty, who's actually a music producer who some of you may know because she's produced a lot of well-known pieces of work, but she certainly doesn't identify with only one genre at all. And she's quite young. She's based in Victoria. She's one of the few female producers in the country. But I just sort of wanted to bring her up as an opportunity because someone nominated her for that fellowship. And someone could nominate you, or you could nominate one of your peers if you feel that that's right. And that fellowship comes with quite a substantial package of money as well as a bit of prestige. So just keep your eye on some of the things the Australia Council is doing, because some of them might just match up with what you actually want to do, and you could imagine yourself in there, including things like our residencies when they happen again and overseas opportunities. You know, they're not just for one type of music, they're for all types of music, but you just have to have a case. Having said all that, of course, like everything in the world, there's never, ever as much funding or opportunity that can possibly ever give everyone the opportunities that we'd all like to. So these are, on the whole, competitive opportunities, but I really just want to encourage people to be involved. Now, I wrote a little note to myself that said, what are we actually talking about? What are we actually working on right now? And the Australia Council right now is working on, I think Dane might give me a better figure, but I think it's about 300 plus applications for our arts projects investment and organisations in grants that have just closed a month ago. And so we're now beginning the assessment process. And part of that assessment process is, sorry, Dane's just corrected me, 1,200. I think I was just talking about the music ones, but anyway, maybe there's 1,200 music ones. There's a lot. Look at that, heaps. But that's going to be assessed by our peers. Oh, no, yep, that's the music one, says Dane. And while we have just closed our peer pool, I really would like to put in people's minds that we are always looking for peers, and peers are people who have the right expertise to be able to assess our various grant programs. We only open up usually between 3 years and 4 years, but we may open up for industry assessors and things like that along the way. So I just like you to keep your eye on what's happening, because we always need experienced and people who represent all the different communities of Australia who work particularly for me in music, who can assess their peers and partake in that process of actually making sure the right money goes to the right people at the right time. So I guess the other things we're working on is just trying to support the arts and culture sector generally, but also music specifically, in my case, and the team I'm working with, to try and find ways to restart, reimagine, and work with our communities to make sure that we're putting the money we have in the right places and the advocacy we have at the right time to ensure we're able to move on, start up, rebuild, and try and build equity and a better opportunity into the future as we moved away from the COVID-19 experience. Haven't had my jab yet, but I'm looking forward to being able to get vaccinated as soon as possible and being able to start flying around and helping build that new story about building ourselves out into a new story around music. So I guess just as a little closure, because I know you probably mostly want to hear about how to get money from grants from Dane. I just a bit of a call out for you all, if you wouldn't mind just keeping an eye on our website. Have a think about looking at things outside the arts and funding, about other opportunities, because you never know, it might just fit you like a glove. And as we move into new opportunities around our digital plan and digital futures, that we're getting more and more nuanced about some of the approaches we're taking with funding and investment as well. but also, if we send out research and things like that, please be part of it, because that helps us build a much more vigorous and thorough story about Australian experiences. And I guess just reinforcing that idea that we work through all funding. All our funding is worked through the priorities that the Australia Council has. So our lens is always on balancing and fairness and equity, and making sure that we invest across the board with things like people who live with disabilities, gender equity, people who live in regional and remote areas, of course prioritising First Nations arts and culture and other elements. But we look at everything to try and balance everything. So please just be part of the conversation and apply when your project is right. And to tell you more about those projects, I'm going to hand over. I'll answer questions at the end if you have any, but I'm going to tell you to hand over to my highly experienced colleague, Dane Hunnerup, who's going to talk to you, I think, about arts and culture, although I realised I just introduced Dane, and Andrew, you might have wanted to do that. But anyway.
That's all good. Thanks, Kirsty. And we'll hand it over to Dane.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dane. I'm coming to you from the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. I'd like to thank our First Nations friends for your custodianship and for allowing me passage on your lands. You'll see that Andrew has just popped up a quick little poll about what best describes what you're up to at the moment. So are you working more on recordings and releases, hopefully for a breakout? Are you looking at doing more road warrior stuff, so national and or international touring? Or are you working on some conceptual music things? And that could be art music, or it could be from the classical sector, or from highly experimental stuff. I'm just interested to read, because I'll address a few of those along the way as I talk. I'll give you a little bit of my background, because I think it's useful to know that the people that work at the Australia Council come from a really diverse background, and we come from where you come from. So I started out as a busker, playing on the streets, playing in cover bands, and then original bands in funk, folk and hip hop and world music. I started promoting club shows and then managing a couple of bands. I ran my own festival, which was a massive failure, and I learned tons of lessons along the way. Around that time, I started working for the Falls Festival. I worked for them for 16 years. I ran a festival for Arts Tasmania. I've co-run a jazz festival. I founded Music Tasmania with some friends, and I've helped a bunch of young bands. I still play as a DJ too. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, I'll also tell you, I'm moving house today. You just got me carrying a heavy bed up a flight of stairs. All right. Today we're going to talk about what grants are available to you songwriters and musicians. I'll very briefly move through ones that are probably not so relevant to you first, and then into the ones that are generally more appropriate. So Kirsty's already mentioned the fellowships that we have. That is for $80,000. There's one a year, and it's kind of to do with what you want. It might be to undertake a special research, or make a grand opus work, or record a wonderful album. It tends to go to people who are kind of at the top of the game, who have a long, successful career. But it's worth just putting a pin in that, because that's a very special fund. I'll quickly touch on arts projects for organisations as well. If you are an incorporated business with an incorporated ABN, you can apply to this grant for projects of between 20 to 100,000. Generally, this grant for organisations is to do a range of things, like they do at the Brisbane Multicultural Arts Centre, or West Australian Music, or the Sydney Improvised Music Association, or the Chamber Orchestras. Excuse me. Sometimes it does support bands that are incorporated, but generally bands are better placed to come into arts projects for individuals and groups, and I'll get to that towards the end. We also have a range of special opportunities Kirsty's mentioned. We do have a music-based Australian residency. It's called Eucharia, which is in the Adelaide Hills. That's designed to assist you to advance a special music project, It's often a cross art form type of activity. So if your musicians are combining with dancers or theatre, they actually pay you to go and live there and work in their beautiful hall with their wonderful grand piano to work towards realising a project. That pops up every year. I'll touch on Playing Australia as well. So that's a special fund to assist Australian shows to tour within Australia, and music shows are definitely eligible. That one's a bit special because it's got no funding upper limit. Sometimes people will come in for $1 million for that one, but it does have some restrictions about what you can spend your budget on. The things that are successful with that grant tend to be more like music stage shows like the Sapphires, Isaiah Firebrand, and sometimes things like the larger operas and classical music performances, especially if they're going to regional and remote areas. Bear with me for a sec. We've recently had a bunch of First Nations specific music opportunities, and these do pop up from time to time. So do keep checking back to our grants page. Every 2 years, we have the Martin Bequest Scholarship, and that's a flat fee of $50,000 towards your musical development. It could be used for tertiary education or undertaking some sort of development or mentorship or learning from a high-end producer or working with another brilliant songwriter or a series of them. We like to see creative applications to that one. If you apply to it for just your masters, we want to also kind of see what you're going to do with your masters. We want to see something with some meat on the bones. All right, so let's get into the thick of it. There are 3 particular grants that we have available that are great for musicians. Arts projects for individuals and groups, the Contemporary Music Touring Program, and the PPCA Sound Recording Partnership. I'll start with that one as that is currently open for application. For those who don't know, the PPCA is the Phonographic Performance Company of Australia. So where APRA's duty is to collect and distribute money for the performance of copyrighted music, the PPCA do the same, but based on the copyright of the recordings themselves. So I do encourage everyone to be a member of both APRA and the PPCA, or the great new one solution. Anyway, the Australia Council and the PPCA have teamed up to provide 5 lots of $15,000 each year. And that's to help artists with the recording costs associated with releasing those. It can include studio costs, producer fees, artist fees. It can also include pressing, making music videos, hiring a publicist, all these types of things. The application form for that one is simpler as it's a flat fee, so we don't need a fully worked budget. You just need to demonstrate that you're expending about $15,000 worth of value in the project. Some examples of people who we've successfully funded in the last year or two. People may know Sandy Evans, the great Australian jazz saxophonist. Alex the Astronaut, she's just had a massive breakout with her most recent album that we funded. Brilliant Australian First Nations artist David Leah, or otherwise known as Radical Sun. And also Laura Jane Lothar, or Cooker, her latest singles we supported through that grant. I'm going to talk through each of these about how the assessors read the grant to give you a bit of perspective about what's going on. And I'll backtrack just a little bit to tell you about who makes those assessments. So the people that make those assessments are people like you. Generally, we'll have maybe 6 people in a room, or variously by Teams and Zoom these days, as we can't get people together. But there'll be people spread across the country who have different skills and knowledges. Often there'll be a music journalist, a producer, someone that's worked with an orchestra, someone that is a hip hop musician, people who have a really broad spread in knowledge and understanding of music, and also who have extremely diverse voices. So there will always have equal representation of men, women, and other identifiers there. We'll have people, artists with disability, First Nations. We like to have as broad a spread at that table as possible. And the discussions are really vigorous, but also really healthy. They know their business and they know the bits that they don't know. So the type of informed discussion is really wonderful. I just wanted to let you know how that works. So looking at the PPCA, they will first consider the artistic merit of your project, and you'll hear this 3 more times. They'll do this by listening to what you've made before and maybe a demo of what you're proposing, as well as reading about your achievements. We'll come back and talk about the quality thing a bit more later. This one, they're particularly interested in diversity as well. We like to support things that represent the diversity of the people of Australia. This can include who is making the music, who are your co-creators, are you bringing something new and interesting to the table? Does it have a chance to open up new Australian audiences to what you're making? These are all good questions to answer in your application. And thirdly, they look at the viability, and this one will pop up more again too. How likely is it that your project will go ahead? And will it find its audiences? Do you have a good team of skilled people around you? If you're going the indie route, can you demonstrate a groundswell of support with the communities that you operate in? The assessors want to make sure that you're not just laying down some tunes and leaving them to gather dust. They want this thing to go well. If you already have your pieces together to make an application to this one, it's open now. It closes on the 13th of April, and that's for projects starting in July. Okay, breather. Has everyone ticked the poll? We'll come back to the poll. Let's get into the Contemporary Music Touring Program. We call it CMTP. This special fund was set up to assist original bands and solos to tour into regional Australia. Whilst we have opened it up to metro touring now, we love it when great Australian bands bring their music to people who may not otherwise get a chance to see it, because it can cost a lot to tour in this big country. We have 3 tiers of funding for this one. So it's up to $15,000 if you're only playing metro shows. So if you say want to play Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, that's not a very big tour, but you can apply for up to $15,000 through CMTP. You might want to stretch it out a little bit more though. We'll fund up to $25,000 if you're playing at least one remote or regional show. So it's not that hard to take a little step sideways and do a regional town to add potentially an extra $10,000 to your budget. So yeah, we want you to go out and play outside of the cities. And then you can get up to $50,000 if 75% of your shows are remote or very remote locations. There's a handy spreadsheet on our website that you can download that tells you what each region are. You can punch in the name of a town and it will tell you. So what can you ask for? Pretty much anything that's a legitimate cost for the tour that you're proposing. Transport, artist fees, Facebook ads, roadies, living away from home allowance for food, insurance, even equipment hire. Like most of our grants, it's, sorry, bear with me. It's not for capital purchases. So no, we're not going to buy you an original 64 Strat like Murray from the Wiggles was playing on like a version. But most other things you can include in your budget. This grant also consistently has the highest success rate of any of our grants. So I strongly encourage you to consider applying to this one in particular. The assessors will consider calibre and quality. Remember, we're going back to that one again. Are your recordings great? Are your people great? You can be early, mid or late career with us. That's fine, but the panel want to hear something wonderful. The second consideration is realistic budgeting and touring, which is a bit like viability. This is why it's great to have someone that knows how to plan a tour on board. And a quick comment about this came up the other day. When you're estimating your earnings from a venue, it's fine to do like what theatre people do. And that's to provide a low estimate. If your shows are $15 a head and you're budgeting at a 40% break even in a 200 capacity room, that's perfectly normal. And that's what the other art forms do. Sometimes musicians try to highball it. But if you sell out, then that's your nice surprise and you can keep the profits. We don't want to see people planning to sell out every show and then running out of petrol halfway. I will talk about COVID plans towards the end as well, but let's leave that for now. And the last consideration for CMTP, the Contemporary Music Touring Program, is the contribution to the development of Australian culture. And you'll see a theme emerge from all of our funds and from what Kirsty was saying before. And that's taking into account whether the project's good for you, good for the people you're working with, and good for the audience. If you can bundle these up well and define the good in what you're offering, then we'll always see you in good stead with an application to us. In this instance, we like to see that you're doing more than just airdrop into town, play your set and take off. We like to see a bit more of a connection. And there's a number of ways you can do that. Some people will do it by offering workshops or songwriting sessions in the town. Other people, if you're working in, like a hardcore scene, it can be more like catching up with people within that particular music community, because you see things start to sprout and seed when you're helping a community to develop in whatever ways you can. If you're into folk or hardcore, then scene building activities are fine. Having a local support is of course great evidence. And if you're going deep into like far north Queensland or the desert nations, then you're earning your stripes by putting in the effort to get there. Artists that we've recently funded through CMTP are Tia Gostello, Troy Casadale, the Rubens, Jeff Lang, and Youth Group. All right, you ready for the big one? Take a breath. Actually, I'm going to have a sip. Okay, it's the big one that we call arts projects for individuals and groups. If you're a band or a solo or an EDM producer or a librettist, if you make circuit bending microtonal kids toys, we'd really like to see more of that stuff. We'd also like to see more applications from the hardcores, from country music and EDM, but I digress. We call it arts projects because if it's a project, you can apply for it here. And we get a really broad range of applications. It's also a good point to note that where we used to have a specific career development grant, what we've actually done is roll that into arts projects. So if you want to undertake a course of study, if you want to undertake mentorships, etc., you can apply as an arts project for that as well. Okay, so like the Contemporary Music Touring Program, we have just closed this round, which means it's a good time to talk about it, as we'll have another round later in the year. It's probably going to be September for projects starting in December. So you've got time to plan a really good application for this one. The most common types of applications we get are for recording, international touring, and making music videos, and it's for between $10,000 to $50,000. This is a harder one to get. It has about a 15% success rate, or 85 out of 100 applications are not successful. But don't let that deter you. Earlier tonight, I asked if you could select an answer in the poll. How are we going with that poll? Do we have any results there, Andrew? I can wait. It doesn't actually...
I just had to take myself off mute. It was mostly recordings and releases were the main interest one. So
yeah, good. And in fact, that prompt was more for your own consideration, because I'll address them all a little bit here. So let's say that first one, let's say you're shooting for a Triple J breakout, maybe some hit singles on Spotify and some cracking great music videos. It's a really good place to start. The assessors will first look at the quality thing again, and they'll often do this by listening to your tracks first, then having a look at what you've done so far. If you're applying for a breakout, are you ready for a breakout? If you're applying to record your first EP and all you've got so far are demos, you're probably not ready to apply to us. Not in all cases, but in most you need some track record first. The assessors want to see that you have a team and enough forward momentum that this funding will help you push over a line to great success. And some examples of who we funded early before they tipped over are Courtney Barnett, G Flip, Skeggs, and the Chats. They were right at a point ready to go, and they needed some investment right then, either to finish an album or to make music videos ahead of the release of an album. And that's when they applied to us, and it was very clear to the assessors that they're onto something great. They're about to do something amazing, and that investment was enough to help tip them over the edge. So that's one way to think about how you can apply to us. You know, some of them would already have been known by Triple J and have had spins. Some of them would have been, I know with Skeggs, they got unearthed and they played one cracking set at Splendour. And the momentum that they gathered from that set was enough to convince our assessors that they were ready for some investment. For those who selected the Road Warrior path, this is another great approach for a lot of artists, and particularly for genre music. So some of our most legendary touring acts come from metal, hip hop, jazz, and folk musics. I know I would struggle to do the 60 show internationals that the metal guys can do back to back. But gee, their touring is really full on, and they do it so well. A great way to cut through with these types of applications is going deep into how and why you're proposing this tour now. Much of the time it can be about breaking new territory or solidifying one that you've been working on. Showing evidence of your YouTube, Facebook, Spotify engagement in these territories can really help, and also excellent planning. If you're working with an experienced tour manager or a toured forwarder, if you have representations in those territories or other bands that you're playing with, that all helps the assessors to understand the viability of your proposal. And just quickly, for those who selected concept art, you sometimes have the easiest ride with applications because you're able to tell a wonderful story about what you're making. Its reasonings, its inspirations, and that story itself will stand you in good stead. Do you have great people working with you again? Do you have festivals interested in what you're doing? That's a great way to pave your way to a great application. All right, I'm going to throw to questions soon, but I might just round out with two more quick things. And this is why you won't get a grant. Sometimes it's nice to flip these things around. You won't get a grant because you gave us bad links. It happens so often, maybe about 10% of applications. People will apply and either the link they gave us to their support material is dead, or the Dropbox file is no longer available, or you're making the assessors identify themselves or sign into something, which they won't do. So make sure you double check your links and you leave your Dropbox files in the right place. Okay, number two, that you haven't used your own voice. Sometimes people will apply in academic speak, or their manager will apply for them, and along the way, so we don't know who we're talking to. A good way to approach your application is write down how you would talk to someone in music face to face. Someone that you haven't met yet, introduce them to your music, but talk to them like you're talking to another person, because that kind of breaks down the barriers and it helps them understand where you're coming from. We don't need references. We want to hear from you. I mentioned before, if your manager applied for you, which happens a lot and can be fine, but sometimes the managers actually forget to talk about the music. All they're doing is talking about, what wonderful things you're doing and, your touring opportunities and your Spotify hits, but they don't actually talk about what's in the album that you are applying for support with. We want to hear about why you're making that album, what's your creative inspiration, what writing directions or journeys you're going on. We want to hear about the art, not just about the business. Another one is not enough detail in the budget. You really need to break that stuff down. Some musicians, when they're making an application, will just put a big lump sum in the budget columns and then not explain how they arrived at that figure. So if it's artist fees, give us an hourly rate or a per gig rate. Tell us if you're doing door splits or how you're paying people. How it works out how you arrive at those figures, because we need to know that you know what you're doing. I'll touch quickly on COVID plans here. We know that this is a changing thing. I'm going to assume that some of you will be making your applications in September for next year projects. I think that's probably going to start to get safer to plan to have some sort of normal activity. But what we are encouraging people to do is to include a COVID safe plan. The simplest way to do this is provide a contingency to say, hey, if we can't tour now or, you know, in March, we're going to postpone it till October. Or if you're planning to do a couple of festival shows, are those festivals willing to go digital if they can't have people gather? Explain, you know, what you will do if you can't do what you're proposing. Lastly, and it's another big one, if you're applying to work with First Nations people, we have some really great protocols on our website, and which I really encourage you to read, because you've got to get it right, and if you get it wrong, you will not get a grant, particularly if what you're doing is telling First Nations stories. So if you've got a First Nations drummer in your band, that's great and easy. Yes, we encourage everyone to work with First Nations people, but if you're trying to tell a dreaming story and that's not the culture that you're from, there's a lot of work you got to do to make that okay, and it may not ever be okay. You need to do the reading. Anyway, ending on that note, there is one more most important thing, and that's talk to us. There are eight of us in the investment team that answer the phone anytime you call. We work on this all the time, and we love talking with artists. I particularly love talking to musicians. Please give me a call. It brightens my day up. And we're around if you want to kick around some ideas. And then as you refine your ideas into a solid application, you can keep checking back with us as you go. That's our job, and that's what we love to do. So I'll post up some contacts now, and I'll throw to questions, Andrew.
So I'm just loading them up now.
Okay, so will I address them as they go?
That'd be great.
Oh, hang on. Okay, there we go. What about cross-media like theatre and music, or puppetry and music? Yeah, that's an interesting one. There are a few ways that you can go about it. And ultimately, you need to select which panel you apply to. We have panels for, let's see if I can reel them off, music, theatre, dance, literature, First Nations, multi, emerging and experimental. So I think that's all. Fix me if I'm wrong, Kirsty. So you need to select which panel you're applying to. Most people here will apply to music. If music is the fundamental of your application and it happens to have some other art forms involved, so, you know, if you're making a music video, you know, you could spend your whole budget on a music video, but it is for the purpose of advancing your music. So that would still be an application to the music panel. Sometimes a project can be indivisible. You cannot break what is theatre and music apart, because they are both critical elements of the one project, and there's no one panel, neither of those, theatre or music, is the right one. Then you can apply to the multi-panel. But you need to make sure that you've got that right. Sorry, there's a cat fight. Was that good, Kirsty?
Is the cat fight in the panel, or was the cat fight?
No, cat fight's in the kitchen. Right, okay. Cross-media projects, yep.
Yep. And by the way, I just want to reinforce what Dane said about the where do I go if I sit somewhere in between is actually quite a common question But ultimately, as Dane said, we're not going to answer it for you because we can't. You ultimately have to have a think about who's going to be on the panel and where do you sit best.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. So think about if you apply to the music panel, everyone who's assessing your application is an expert in music. If you apply to multi, there will be someone from visual arts, that's the one I left out. Visual arts, literature, dance, theatre, they have the broadest spread of all arts languages, but will they understand your application best? That's the question you need to answer. Any more? Are we light on in questions? I'm not seeing them.
I think, sorry, just going to turn my video on. So I think it's one of the situations that between yourself and Kirsty, all the information you provide has been great. I know that sometimes people can be a little bit shy. So if you do have questions, definitely get in contact with Dane and Kirsty and the other Australia Council staff. They're all really lovely, and both Australia Council and also other arts organisations on a federal and on state and local government levels, their role is to help you do the best possible application you can. So I think that's the questions for now. So what I might do is I might hand over to Kip Wood from our media licensing department to do a bit of a kind of an overview about some questions that some of you might have as APRA members about online licensing, Spotify, iTunes, some, Apple Music, and also other questions you might have about AMCOS as well. So I'm just going to set up Kip now. And thanks again to Dane and Kirsty. It's been a really great Australia Council presentation. We really appreciate their time.
Thanks, Tuts. My name's Kip. Am I right? Okay. My name's Kip. I work at APRA AMCOS. I've been with APRA AMCOS now for about 14 years. I've been asked here to talk to you about, I guess, digital licensing and music licensing that we do. So I've got a PowerPoint. So even though it's a licensing talk, it does have a PowerPoint. So I guarantee you it'll be clammy at best. Okay. So the department that I work in is the media licensing department. We are split up into 3 divisions. So we have the digital licensing side, the broadcast licensing, and the recorded music licensing side. Now, within the media licensing team, our licenses that we administer actually span across both APRA rights and AMCOS rights. So I guess now would be a good time to, differentiate between the various rights between APRA rights and AMCOS rights. So as I'm sure most of you are aware, APRA is a performing rights association. So APRA, put simply, will collect and distribute royalties that are owed to you for the performance in public of your works. So AMCOS, however, is a mechanical copyright society, and mechanical is kind of an old school term. I think it came about when, print music was the way to distribute your music. But put simply, mechanical rights are the reproduction rights. So, in terms of the APRA licensing that the media licensing team does, we license broadcast, streaming, music and websites, video on demand, and also webcasting. Now, for the mechanical side, the reproduction side, we license the reproduction of your works on CD, vinyl, DVD, digital downloads, and also synchronization. Now, getting into the specifics of, I guess, the digital side, predominantly the major side of the digital licensing is streaming. So streaming takes up the lion's share of most digital royalties earned. And we license predominantly the major sort of players that you see. So we license SoundCloud, Amazon Music, we license Apple Music and Spotify, and also iHeartRadio and various others. So there are two major players in that lot. I guess to give you some sort of reference, 90% of royalties earned from streaming services are distributed out from royalties that are earned through both Spotify and Apple Music. And in addition to the audio-only streaming, we license video-on-demand services. So that is your Stans, your Disney Pluses, your Apple TV, Netflix, and also Amazon Prime. So we can also collect and distribute royalties for any of your works that appear on shows that I guess enter on that platform. We can do that through streaming logs that we receive from these services and through what are called cue sheets. So cue sheets are essentially a way that we are supplied the information of the music that appears in a show or a movie, and that is, we get the duration, the specific episode, all that sort of stuff. We receive all of that information and we distribute out accordingly. So next we have downloads. Now downloads are shrinking, but they are still an essential, I guess, platform for a group of people, including DJs, radio stations and the like. Now digital downloads, we receive the reports and the mechanical royalties from these services, which we then distribute out from. Now, I guess to give you an example of just the difference between what we deal with and what we process in terms of reports received from streaming services versus what we receive from the major download services. The reports that we receive from streaming services are kind of in the millions of lines, whereas with the major download services, it's kind of in the hundreds of thousands. So there is quite a big discrepancy between, I guess, the different digital services and the royalties that stem from them. Okay, next we have user-generated content. So I guess user-generated content are, your platforms where anyone can just upload material onto them. So that's, your YouTubes and social media like Facebook and Instagram. So these are licensed services so that, I guess, when music is streamed from these services, we can actually distribute royalties out from those streams. So there are a number of ways that your works can be identified. Each of those services have their own sort of content ID systems. But if you are uploading onto something like YouTube, I'd recommend doing it through your aggregator if you are releasing through an aggregator. That way that, all of the important information about your work and also your recording as an independent artist comes through correctly to the right people, and you can actually receive the royalties that are able to you. So next up, I guess, when releasing digitally, I think it's kind of important to understand where royalties flow and what royalties are actually earned. So if you're not already aware, with any recorded music, there's actually two separate copyrights involved. On the one hand, you have the copyright of the musical work. So that's the composition, that's your melody, your lyrics, that sort of thing. Then it's the copyright that's owned by the songwriters or publishers representing the songwriters. Now, in addition to the copyright in the composition, which is commonly known as the publishing right, you have the copyright in the sound recording. So that's the specific recording that is being streamed, downloaded, or used. And that copyright is often known as the master right. So the master right is either held by the recording artist when released independently, or by a record label if they're signed. So what happens, I guess, to simplify it, what happens with a DSP, a digital service provider, like something like iTunes, the download occurs on that server. So someone buys your track, the master rights, the royalties that are earned from your sound recording are then paid out through to your aggregator. For example, GyroStream, and the many others. Once the aggregator receives that royalty, then they pay out through to the recording artist or the record label. So in addition to the royalty that's earned from the sound recording, and another royalty, a mechanical royalty, is then payable through to APRA AMCOS. So that's the royalty that's earned for the composition. And once APRA AMCOS receives that, then we would distribute out through to our various members. So as you're probably aware, you know, when you co-write songs with other people, there can be, you know, various percentages of ownership on a particular work. And if it's registered correctly in our system, we can easily distribute out the royalties appropriately from that earning. So something to remember whenever you are releasing music digitally is that there are a number of different ways that you can assist your representatives to identify your works correctly. I guess first and foremost, that would be ensuring that your details are up to date with APRA AMCOS, and that you are registering, you're keeping up to date with your registrations of your works. Because if it doesn't exist in our database, then we can't actually pay out on those royalties. Another way is by obtaining an ISRC. Now, the ISRC stands for the International Standard Recording Code. These can be obtained via ARIA, and I believe some aggregators even supply ISRCs. But if you're wanting to, I guess, maintain them yourself, you can go through ARIA. So the ISRC is a unique code that relates specifically to a recording. Now, when iTunes and the various sort of digital providers first started up, they were very recording centric. So the kind of information that we had to process and deal with were very skewed towards the owners of the sound recordings. So we've implemented and been able to work with using ISRCs within our system to be able to identify correctly the works that are connected to a specific recording that is being, I guess, downloaded or streamed. Now, next we have, I guess, in the same way that your works are played within Australia, your works can actually still be collected for, despite APRA AMCOS not being in that territory. So copyright is territory specific, and what that means is that, you know, the copyright law that applies in Australia might not necessarily apply to maybe the UK. Actually, you know, the Copyright Act, even within APRA AMCOS territories, varies as well. Like a very large example is that APRA AMCOS actually works within three territories: Fiji, New Zealand, and Australia. Now, there is a number of differences between the Copyright Act between those territories, but I guess one of the glaring ones is that within Australia, copyright exists, the copyright of a composition exists for the life of the composer or composers, and then for an additional 70 years after the death of the last living composer. Now, within New Zealand and Fiji, it exists for the life of the composer, but then for an additional 50 years. So you can see where, 20 years is quite a long period, and quite a lot of works that might be out of copyright in New Zealand and Fiji might still be in copyright within Australia and would require, licensing. Now, back to the territories. So even though APRA AMCOS does not really operate outside of Australia, New Zealand and Fiji, we have affiliate relationships with affiliate societies around the world. So there are a number of different societies and associations that operate within those territories, and where a royalty is earned in that territory, our affiliate society can collect them on your behalf and distribute them through to us, which we then pay on through to our members. Now, the example used here is by no means extensive. This is it'd be a pretty busy picture. It's only a small sort of handful, but it's got, your ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, for the States, Harry Fox, SOCAN in Canada, PRS, and MCPS in the UK, Gamer in Germany, and JASRAC Japan. All of these associations or organisations, mechanical rights and performing rights associations, all work together to ensure that members of their respective territories are paid for the use of their works. Then we have broadcast. So broadcast, APRA AMCOS licenses broadcasters, so the major broadcasters, so commercial television, pay TV, commercial radio, and also community radio. So we have blanket licenses in place with these broadcasters, and they provide us with basically content reports, and we pay out on those content reports. And like the video on demand services I spoke about earlier, we also have the cue sheets and the content reports. So we receive all the broadcast reports, we receive them, and together we can, effectively pay out on the royalties that are earned within, that particular period. So commercial radio provides us with music logs, so that it's quite an extensive report. So if your music is played on a commercial station, it'll definitely get picked up in the music logs that we receive. However, when you're starting out, probably community radio is probably a bit more applicable to where your music might be played or broadcast. Now, community stations, it's a relatively low kind of fee license that we have with community stations. They're basically run on the love of volunteers and, the smell of an oily rag. So what we receive from community radio is, they report a week within a certain period, or a certain time period within, a licensing period. So not everything would get picked up on a music log that we receive from a community station. However, if you are aware of your music being played on community radio, please reach out and we can look into it for you. Now, the physical product side, so we also license record labels. So we license major labels and indie record labels, and they report physical sales for any releases that contain our members' works. So, you know, the physical product side is dwindling as well. Everything is definitely aiming towards, I guess, streaming or download, but you know, they are still alive and still kicking. And I guess more specifically to, I guess, newer artists, we have also licenses for, I guess, people who are independently releasing. So that leads on to how do I release another artist's work independently, and when do I need permission? So we receive lots of calls from people every day, and we get the impression that there's quite a lot of misinformation about, you know, permissions that are required or fees that are required to be paid for, you know, things as simple as an audio-only recording. So if you are independently releasing another songwriter's work, you do not need permission from that rights holder unless you are changing lyrics to the existing work, creating an arrangement that significantly alters the original work. It's the first release of the work. So, so if you hear maybe one of your friends' tracks and you decide you want to record it before that person's had a chance to release it, you actually do need permission first before you can release that work. So it's a right to first release, and also samples. Oh, and also interpolations. So interpolations, in the way that samples use the sound recording and also part of the composition, interpolations are when you kind of use lyrics or melodies from an existing work and incorporate that into your own work. So that if you are using lyrics or melodies from another existing work, you would need permission from that. And lastly is synchronization. So synchronization is the process of including music with video. It's pairing music with video. So synchronization, you do need permission generally, and that includes live streaming. So in terms of what we can assist, if outside of those things, if you are releasing another writer's work, APRA AMCOS can assist you in licensing that work. So whether you require licensing, I guess, just depends on the platforms that you release on. So the previous digital service providers that were mentioned earlier, you know, Apple Music, iTunes, Spotify, etc. They're all licensed services. So what that means is that the money that's earned by that service is, a portion of it is paid through to APRA AMCOS, which we then can distribute out to the various rights holders that are streamed within that period. However, one of the common digital service providers that isn't licensed, that you may require a license for, is if you decide to release on Bandcamp. So Bandcamp requires or puts the onus on any artist or record label that is uploading onto their platform. They put the onus of any licensing that's required onto the uploader. So if you are releasing maybe covers, or you know, you have published co-writes or something like that, where you might need to take out a license, then yeah, get in touch with us, absolutely. In addition to Bandcamp, the digital side, if you are releasing physically, we can also help you out with any licensing requirements there. We provide the audio manufacture license, which is, you know, it's a relatively simple process. you send through the information about your release, including title, recording artist, and the various tracks that appear on that recording. Send that through to us. We then identify any of the works that are licensable. Obviously, you're not licensing your own works unless you have a publisher. But if there are any sort of published works on there or co-writes that are AMCOS members that you want to pay through our license, we can identify those shares and then calculate the royalties generated from those works or those shares for the number of units that you're manufacturing. So it's just a one-off license. It's relatively simple. And I guess the only time you need to take out a license again is if you look to do a second pressing or third pressing. Now, how can we help? So synchronization, as I said, is the inclusion of a composition of inclusion of music in video. That can cover, as it's up on there, movies, advertisements, TV, video games, film clips, YouTube videos, you name it. And as I said, it's synchronization is the process of including the work in the video. So just because you have licensed the synchronization for maybe one of your works to appear on a TV show, it doesn't mean that you won't receive any additional or ongoing royalties from the broadcast of your works on a licensed broadcaster. So while synchronization is not covered in the AMCOS mandate, you can opt as an AMCOS member to have AMCOS negotiate and issue a license on your behalf for any particular request that you might receive. I mean, AMCOS receives many requests from I guess music supervisors and producers who are looking for rights holder information. So if we ever get any sync requests for works that you control, then we will send you out notification, and you can either opt to deal directly with that particular producer or music supervisor, or you can have you can opt for AMCOS to negotiate and draft up an agreement on your behalf. Now, if you do decide to license it directly, all I can suggest is make sure you read everything whenever you're doing any sort of agreement with regards to your rights. Make sure that you read everything, you get everything in writing, and that you understand what you're actually signing up for. Now, if there are kind of any questions that you might have around a particular agreement that you might see, unfortunately, APRA AMCOS can't provide legal advice. However, you can lean on, like Chrysler Services, or who is it? Like Arts Law, the Arts Law Centre, resources like the Copyright Council. These guys are amazing, and they can assist you with the more legal side of anything that you're kind of unsure of. Now, if you do find any of your work that you do not wish for it to be up there with, that's sort of digitally specifically and physically as well, you can reach out to AMCOS and APRA, and we can assist you in issuing takedown notices to ensure that that your rights are protected, and that any use of your work that has not been cleared and permitted by you as the rights holder are taken down. And so, and that's about it from me. Are there any questions, Tuts?
It doesn't look like there are. I think we've put some links in there, and sorry, I was taking my video off. put my video on even. There's a decent amount of crossover with the presentation that we did last week with Nikki Tuckwell, the kind of APRA AMCOS 101. Do you actually have one question? Can you go back one slide in the presentation?
Oh boy, how do I do that?
I think it's just the share screen again.
One tick. Sorry, bear with me a second. Okay. Okay, and then one tick, sorry. Are we sharing? Ed sharing?
Sharing the wrong thing. It was sharing our riveting email chain back and forth.
Oh, very good.
So if you want to reshare, just as was, I think it'll be all good.
Okay, just bear with me a tick. Was there something specific while I'm trying to sort this out? Was there something specific that you had a question about?
I can jump in while you're doing that as well. There's a couple of other questions about PPCA as well as APRA AMCOS. So in answer to those questions, so thank you, Philip and Chris. As Kip was mentioning earlier on, as well as Nikki discussed in our presentation last week, the PPCA looks after the sound recording right, where APRA AMCOS looks after the songwriting right at its basic level. So if, we collect royalties for songs that you've written, and then the PPCA look after songs that you've recorded. So if you're a songwriter who also owns your own copyright, is releasing your own music, I'll put myself on video. In that case, you should definitely sign up to PPCA as well as APRA AMCOS so that there'd be royalties you can receive for the recording side of things as well as the songwriting side of things. So I hope that helps Chris and Philip.
Okay, is that better? Tuts?
Yep, that's showing that, the protecting your rights.
Yep. So did you have any questions around this one specifically, or?
So I think Alicia was just taking notes.
Oh,
from
okay.
that slide. So yeah, and just a follow-up question from Chris as well is it the streaming recording? So within a stream, there's a sound recording royalty, and there's also the songwriting royalties, which Kip had mentioned as well. So there's two different elements within a stream. So there's two different kinds of royalties you can receive. So if it's at a basic level, if it's your song that you've recorded, you would have sound recording and songwriting rights. If it was a song that you covered, you'd receive the recording royalties, the sound recording royalties, and the original songwriter would receive the songwriting rights. Likewise, if someone was covering a song of yours, they'd receive the royalty for the recording, you'd receive the royalty as a songwriter. So yeah.
Absolutely correct.
So I might wrap it up there for you. Just trying to get this light up here in sunny Brisbane for you, Kip. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks as well. So Chris, I'm just going to pop a link into the main chat for you so you can sign up to PPCA. It's definitely worth signing up. I'm just going to pop that in for anyone who is interested in signing up with them as well. Definitely do it. So thank you so much to Kip, and also thank you so much to Australian Council, Dane and Kirsty as well. We really, really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining in the Meet the Locals session. We've recorded this and we'll be uploading it to YouTube in the next few days. We'll have it online till the end of the month. And in the meantime, have a look at our website for the Meet the Locals sessions around the country as well. We've had ones in Queensland and WA already. We'll be doing them for other states and territories around Australia as well. It's a really good opportunity to connect with your fellow songwriters and composers, and also some music industry in your state. Going on from a COVID element, we're doing a bit of hard borders with this as well. So whilst an event like this, having everyone from around the country is great, it's also a bit nice just to be able to reconnect with your own scene. So thanks all for attending again. We'll send you a link with a survey and also the download link as well. Thanks for your time, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, mate.